The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alan Blumkin. I'm here with my good friend David Nemec on another edition of David Nemec's Baseball History and Trivia. And today we're going to discuss some of the World Series that were part of the Yankees' 1949 and 1953 dynasty. Welcome, David.
Pleasure to be with you again, Al. And we're going to be covering one team that got almost no series play prior to 1950. In fact, they preferred only one series, but we'll get to it. And they're happen to be in this series now. And it's been a while since they've been on the series. But we both welcome them back and welcome the Astros. But we're going back to our youth a bit and talk about some of the early pennant winners and champions. And Al, your first one was, I think you said...
My first one was 1951.
Yeah, I was
8 years old, and I got into it because I bought the baseball cards. My parents didn't know anything about it, and I started watching the games late in that year. And unfortunately, I was in school when Bobby Thompson hit the home run. But when the Yankees played the Giants at the World Series, I watched as much of it as I could, because in those days all the games were played in the daytime. Yeah, so if you go to school like I was, you missed the games that weren't on the weekend.
Yeah, it was a different experience. I remember being from Cleveland. When Cleveland won the pennant in 1948, as you can imagine, Cleveland went crazy because they hadn't been in the series since 20, and they didn't get in another one until 54, which was very short. And then from then on was a long drought. But 48, that was the first series I ever watched. And then I only saw the three games that were in Cleveland. And even though they were all, the three Cleveland home games were all on television, as I recall. I think they all were on. And maybe only a Sunday game was on, I'm not sure. But I did see Satchel Paige appear in Cleveland uniform on the series, the only series appearance. And that's my first memory. But I was right there with Al in 51 because I really loved watching the World Series, especially when it was on a weekend. And they weren't televised in school then, and they were at night, so kids really couldn't watch them. Sometimes they get to listen to them on the radio. But even in Cleveland in 48, that didn't happen.
I remember watching, especially running home from school. It was only 3 blocks away. In 1951, for the final game, which is Game 6, in fact, the Giants had, with the momentum from the playoff against the Dodgers, they won 2 out of the first 3 games against the Yankees, and then there was a rain out that delayed the fourth game of the day, and the Yankees wound up taking the last 3 games. I watched some of the 5th game where the Yankees won 13-1, and Gil McDougall, who was a rookie that year, hit a grand slam home run, and Eddie Lopat pitcher. So I run home. I was rooting for the Yankees already because when I got the cards, the first player that struck me was Yogi Berra. I said, "Who the heck is Yogi Berra?" So I started following him, and in the final game, Hank Bauer hit a triple. Has always hit in the series. Hit a triple with the bases loaded to make the score 4-0. The Yankees were leading 1-0 at the time. And then in the 9th inning, the Giants put a couple of men on base. and they had, I think, Irvin and Thompson coming up, and Stengel brought him a lefty reliever they had gotten from Washington earlier that season named Bob Kazava.
Oh, yeah.
And Kazava, they both Irvin and Thompson hit deep fly balls. If you remember the configuration of the old Yankee Stadium, it was like 467 feet to left center. And they had two long fly balls that wound up to being sacrifice flies. And then they brought in 2 runs to make it 4-3. And then DeRocha sent up a third-string catcher named Sally Vars to pinch hit. And he hit a sinking fly ball, which Bauer made a tumbling catch on to end the World Series. And I remember reading that they asked Stengel why he brought in Kazava. He said, because I knew they were going to, nice long fly balls to the deepest area of the ballpark.
Yeah,
but I had read as a kid, because I started reading all these books and everything. And when I was collecting the 51 Bowmans, I got a whole bunch of Phillies. I got Roberts and Ashburn and Ennis and Hamner and Jones and everybody. One of the Phillies, who were known as the Whiz Kids, were leading the whole season, and then they suffered a couple of blows on their pitching staff. Kurt Simmons, who was 17-8, in early September, his National Guard unit was activated, and he went to Korea for a year. And then Bubba Church got hit in the face with a line drive off the bat of Ted Kluszewski. And Bob Miller, who was a rookie that year, came down with a sore arm. So when it got to Game 3, because I think the first game, Rashi beat Constanti 1-0. And then Reynolds beat Robert Roberts 2-1 where Joe DiMaggio had a home run at the top of the 10th.
Yeah, and then they beat Russ Meyer.
They beat Ken Heinzelman.
No, I think it was
No, look it up. Ken Heinzelman won 3. Heinzelman won 3 games. He won 3 games and he started Game 3. Look it up.
Game 3. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Because
they expected big things out of Heinzelman.
Yeah.
And Russ Meyer in 50, and both of them are huge disappointments. And if they'd known in advance that they were going to be huge disappointments, nobody probably wouldn't have been a single bet in the country placed on the Phillies, because they were considered the Phillies 2 key pitchers going into the 50 season. Roberts hadn't shown that much yet. Constanti was a mediocre reliever prior to 1950. Simmons was very promising. And would have been, and they had Simmons, Miller, and Church as rookies, but Meyer and Heinzelman are expected to be their big 2, and I think between them they won like 11 games or something like that.
Well, the only Philly who hit in that series at all was Granny Ham.
Yeah, it was a light hitting series to say the least, but an extremely well played series, and the games were all close, right down to the last one was the only game that wasn't a run game. And the first game, the Roberts had been used in the start to clinch the pennant in the immortal game, the last game of the season in the National League, where they beat the Dodgers in 10 innings on a Dick Sisler home run, and the Phillies vaulted the first pennant since 15, and they weren't even close in any of the years after that until.
Well, they was
1950.
I think we discussed this a while back. They had an ownership that in the 30. I mean, I told you that 38 to 42, they won 225 games over 5 years.
Yeah.
And anytime they got a player that was halfway decent, the ownership sold them to some other team in the league to keep operating.
Yeah, they were a horrible team, and Connie Mack loved it because his teams were almost equally bad, but he managed to
they played
survive.
that dump Baker Bowl until middle June of 1938.
Yeah, and that was. Then they moved in Shibe and shared Shibe with the
and they took it over when the Phillies went to the A's went to Kansas City.
Yeah. But that's that 50 Phillies team. I was lucky. I was still very young, and we were living in Cleveland. And my father said, "You want to see the Whiz Kids play?" And they picked up the name the Whiz Kids early in the season when they got off to a hot start, and they were a young team. And I said, "Sure." So we drove to Pittsburgh. I believe it was on a Saturday, and saw the Pirates play the Phillies, and the Phillies won, and I was really thrilled because the Indians didn't look like they were going to do much in 50, although they did fairly well, and eventually took them a while to get going. So I was rooting for the Phillies hard all the way, and it was a big deal for me to, think of them being in the World Series. We didn't have a TV set then, so I don't recall seeing any live action on TV, and they didn't have stuff like instant replays then. The news programs. They may have shown a highlight or two, but you really didn't get to see the details the way you do now. Now you can see almost everything one way or another. Even if you don't go to a game all season, it'll be shown on TV, or it'll be shown on your iPad or whatever. You can, all kinds of devices.
Yeah, in Pittsburgh in those days, the fans would leave after what they considered to be Ralph Kleiner's last at bat.
That was the highlight, really. That's true.
But it's funny you mentioned the American League in 1950. You had 4 teams that won over 90. The Yankees won 98, the Tigers 95, the Red Sox 94, and Cleveland 92. And the rest of the other 4 teams, I don't think any one of them won as many as 70 games.
No, they were pretty bad.
The Red Sox hit over 300 as a team. It was a big hitters year. 48, 49, 50 were huge hitting years, especially in the American League. And the Red Sox hit over 300 as a team and scored over 1,000 runs. And they also had an ERA of 4.88.
It really was that kind of league, and the Washington teams, Washington, Chicago, St. Louis,
and the A's.
They were all three.
The A's were last.
The A's were. The A's had a good team in '48, and they had another good team in Bobby Shands' big year. But beyond that,
they were terrible.
They were terrible after their pennant string, and you're in 29, 30, 31. They continued to stay in contention for a couple of years, and then Mac dealt them big stars like Fox and Simmons and Grove, and
the whole history of the A's franchise, even to this day, they've even been great or terrible. There's very little mediocrity.
Yeah, that's right. And so, the American League was, but the White Sox and the Go White Sox, they hired Paul Richards as the manager, and And by 50, 51, they
51 they became good in 51.
Yeah,
because Fox
was a rookie.
Yeah, Fox was a great hitter. They stole Minoso from the Indians, and because Frank Lane, before he got crazy, got Billy Pierce from the Tigers for a backup catcher named Aaron Robinson, and they had gotten Aaron Robinson from the Yankees in part of the trade a couple of years earlier, where Robinson was part of the deal that sent Eddie Lopez to the Yankees. And then they got Nellie Fox for a backup catcher named Joe Tipton from the A's. And then they got rid of, in 51, they got rid of Gus Zardio and Dave Philly in a 3-team trade with the Indians, and they got Minoso from Cleveland.
Yeah.
But one of the more interesting seasons to me, the first season that was full for me, was 1952. Because that was the key to the Yankees winning 5 straight. The Yankees were locked with this may be painful to you. They were locked in a race with the Indians.
Yeah, that was painful.
And they both, at the end of August, I did a lot of research on these teams a bunch of years ago. The Yankees were 2 games ahead of the Indians. They both went 19-5 in September. And the Yankees won the pennant by 2 games. One of the big problems that the Indians had was that Bob Feller crashed from a 22-8 season in 1951 to 9-13, and had the worst ERA of any qualifier in the American League that year.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, they had by that time. Lopez, they replaced Lugo with Lopez, and they picked up early win on the cheap, really, when you look back on it, because Washington pretty much seen him as a perpetual mediocrity, and when he came to Cleveland, Mel Harder put some time in on him, and Wynn turned into a pretty great pitcher, and then Lemon, who came back from the war, still fancying himself a center fielder or a third baseman, was converted in 1946. The conversion was started to make him a pitcher, and by 47, he was mainly a pitcher. And then, by 52, you had a staff of Lemon, Garcia, Wynn, and you needed a 4th pitcher. And we had Bob Feller for your 4th starter. As Al is pointing out, it was a huge disappointment.
And they didn't have a left-hander until Herb Score came on in 1955.
Yeah. But Cleveland, Cleveland also had they made Lou Brissy, who'd been a starter with the A's. They made him into a reliever. He was supposed to be like a closer, a modern closer, but he really was. He pitch more in long relief, and he just did a terrible disappointment. They gave quite a bit for him, and he was, he as much as Feller were the reasons that Cleveland didn't win the pennant, I think. And Gromek, who was a pretty good pitcher too, also had a pretty mediocre season. So they really had the big 3, and behind them they had Feller, Gromek, and Brissy, and they picked up Mickey Harris, who was really just about through. And they were developing Sam Jones, who they didn't get the best out of him. They traded him long before he developed into a pretty strong pitcher in the 50s. So that pitching staff they were famous for still was in an embryonic stage in 52. By 53, they really started to come together and be a very strong staff.
Well, the Yankees had their own problems in 1952. Lopez had a sore arm. He was out for a couple of months. Reynolds won 20 games and led the league in ERA. And then in 1953, Stengel converted him to a relief pitcher, basically. He didn't even have enough innings to qualify for the ERA in 53. And Ford was in the Army. Tom Morgan, who had essentially replaced Ford in 1951, was drafted into the Army. And so they wound up using Johnny Sane, basically as a fourth star. They had gotten him from the Braves for Lou Burdette the previous, and they brought in retreads like Ray Scarborough and Ewell Blackwell. In fact, Ewell Blackwell, he was something like 3-12 for the season between the Reds and the Yankees, and they actually started him in the fifth game of the World Series.
Yeah,
that was the game where Carl Erskine pitched all 11 innings, and he gave up 5 runs in 1 inning. And there was a terrible call at first base. This umpire, Art Passarella, called Johnny St. out at first base, and the ball was at least 3 feet from Gil Hodges.
Yeah, I remember
and Carl Ferrollo took a game-tying home run in the bottom of the 11th away from Johnny Mize, who was having a very, very good World Series. In the 6th game, Rashi beat Billy Rose. That was the game where Billy Rose claimed he lost the ground ball in the sun.
Which actually was possible. I mean, discovered
years later is possible. And he also committed a balk. So they won that game 2-1, and then came the 7th game, which I was able to watch on TV, and I was going nuts. They started Joe Black, the Dodgers, who dressing with ruin totally ruined after 1952. The Yankees started Reynolds. And it was a back and forth. Mantle hit a home run. And the Yankees took a 4-2 lead into the bottom of the 7th. They already had used Rashi and Lopat in relief. Rashi was anytime they tried to use Rashi in relief, he was terrible. And so anyway, the Dodgers bring in a couple of load the bases, and with 1 out, and he brings in Cazava from 51, brings in Bob Cazava again. He gets Snyder out, who is a lefty against lefty. Then Robinson comes up and hits that famous pop-up that Billy Martin had to run in all the way from second base and catch at his knees because the first baseman, Joe Collins, couldn't find it. And since there were 2 out, they were all running. And it saved the series. Cazava actually pitched 2 2.3 innings in relief in that last game and didn't give up anything. And he was the second year in a row. He was, he closed out World Series. And he asked people who Bob Cazava was. So who? He was an average pitcher who had his moments. And then in 53, the Yankees had their easiest pennant race of the 5. They beat Cleveland out by 8.5 games. And they won 99 games, and the last series was washed out by rain, and the league decided they didn't have to make it up because there's no point. The Dodgers came in with 105 wins. They beat the living hell out of everybody that season. They had 285 as a team. Campanella had a fantastic year. Snyder had a fantastic year. Ferrillo had a fantastic year, led the league in hitting. Hodges had a terrific year. They weren't going away. Erskine was a 20-game winner. Newcomer was in the Army that year. So they opened the series, and the Yankees win the first two games. And Billy Martin, who was an average ball player during the season, but when he got to the World Series, would turn it up 100 notches. The only one that I could compare him to who was like that was Johnny Evers from the old, Cubs. If you look at Johnny Evers' record in the World Series he played in, he was another one that just turned it on and turned it up. And Martin got 12 hits in the series. The Yankees won the fifth game because Mickey Mantle hit a grand slam home run off Russ Meyer, and they won the game 11-7. The Yankees started the immortal Jim McDonald in that game. I don't know if you even remember him.
Oh, yeah.
But and then at the bottom, and Howie Reynolds won games in 05 of the World Series. But the one he got in 1953 was a vulture. He comes in after 7 innings. They took Whitey Ford out after 7 innings. They bring Reynolds in with a 3-1 lead, and he serves up a 2-run home run to Carl Ferrillo on the top of the ninth. So I'm going nuts. I said, I thought that it was over, and I was sickened. When you're 10 years old, you're so passionate about this that you get emotionally ill over stuff like that. And they got a couple of men on. Bauer got a hit, and then I think Yogi got a hit. And Billy Martin comes up and drives in the winning run. And that completed the 5-year sweep, which, especially in the context of the way things are now, that'll never be duplicated. Even come close to being duplicated.
You're right. I mean, the Yankees were. Here's how the Yankees. Here's one thing I just noticed this myself. We talked about the 52 season, how both teams, both Cleveland and New York, went in to September with New York having a very slight lead and preserving the lead. And Cleveland played all but 3 of the September games at home. And one of their home games was a make-up rainout on Sunday, September 14th, against the Yankees. And this is the only time they played the only game.
I know that. Yeah, I was very surprised when I found that out. Yeah.
Yeah, and that game, Cleveland, even though it was right in the heart of the pennant race, this is a team that in 48, regardless of who they played, they were drawing 35, 40, 50,000 people. Here we are in 1952. Bill Veeck has sold the team. The team is right in the heart of the pennant race. They're bringing the Yankees in on Sunday afternoon. Lopez starts for the Yankees. Garcia starts for Cleveland. And, battle of two. Lopez had, gave Cleveland incredible problems every time they faced him. Garcia was a strong pitcher that year. And this was the only game in September that drew over 36,000 people and change people. The only game in September. And every other game, there were a lot of scattering of games that drew under 10,000. Even though they're right in the heart of the pennant race, Steve, playing at home. And I didn't notice this either. The attendance figures were just way down for the most part. But that September game, on that Sunday afternoon, drew 73,608 people, and that was more than double, almost double any other game that month, and 5-6 times as much as they drew in some of their other games. You know, they would play teams like Detroit, which was respectable, still somewhat respectable, and they'd draw 5,000 people. And it was crazy how the heart was coming out of teams and attendance in the 50s, in part because of television, in part because of Cleveland ownership changed hands and go back. But the biggest thing that was happening was the minor leagues were dwindling, and televising home games for at least a lot of these teams was killing attendance.
Yeah,
they still were doing it.
Well, what happened here is the Yankees and Giants shared Channel 11, and the only televised was home games. Well, I was listening when the game where in 1957 where score got hit in the eye. I was listening to it because it was a Yankee road game and it had the damn Giant. That was the last year the Giants were here, but they're televising their games and the home games.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, well, one of the things about the dynasty is that the Yankees made transitions. The only four position players that played in 100 or more games each of the 5 seasons were Berra, Rizzuto, Woodley, and Bauer.
Yeah.
At first base, they went from Tommy Henrich to basically a platoon between Joe Collins and Johnny Mize. At second base, they went...
Bill Skowron by the mid-50s.
Yeah, that was why Bill Skowron wasn't a rookie till 54. He wasn't up till 54. And at second base, they had Jerry Coleman. And when Coleman went into the army, was called up for Korea, Billy Martin took his place. And when Coleman came back, he couldn't hit anymore. And at third base, they sent Billy Johnson to the Cardinals. Bobby Brown was more into his medical practice, and Gil McDougall became the third baseman. And, of course, the big transition in center field from Joe DiMaggio to Mickey Mantle.
Yeah.
So, but they were able to do a lot of replacements, and some people said that their farm system, they had better teams in AAA than teams like the Browns had, in the majors.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, I remember I was living in West Palm Beach one year, and the A's trained there in '54, and I did see some spring training games. We practiced. The high school team practiced after the games. I saw a lot of the Yankees recruits, and they had a guy named Emil Tellinger. Have you ever heard of him, Al?
The only thing I know about him is that he was one of the package they sent to the Cardinals when they got, Slaughter. Bill Vernon was part of that package. Yeah.
Now, this was a guy who looked like a real ball player. He looked like it, and in batting practice, he looked great. He played in the game. He got a couple hits. And I was looking. I never heard of this guy. Here's this guy, Emil Tellinger. And I don't think he even made the. I don't know if he ever even. Did he ever play in a major league game?
I don't think so.
I don't even know if I don't think so either.
Yeah.
And they had a stockpile of it. And Marv Throneberry had incredible years in the minor leagues with the Yankees.
Yeah, and when Kansas City came into the league, the Yankees moved the franchise to Denver. With their air, and Marv Throneberry became a superstar. They spent 2 years in Denver.
Yeah, they had guys who were buried away, and eventually most guys got a chance. Eventually, Tellinger, I don't think ever did. But there's a guy who looked like a little ball player, and I'm looking at this guy and saying, "This guy, wow, he should be a star. Why is he throwing the liners?" And looked good in spring training, but they were loaded. I mean, they had guys in their farm system. Al's right, that could have been good for at least a decent second division team.
Yeah, same thing with the Dodgers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then you got to remember there were only 16 teams there.
Yeah.
And 16 times 25 is only 400 players, and
You know one of the things they asked Richie Ashburn once why they didn't win after 50, and he said no blacks because they were the last team in the National League to integrate. And one of the things that really stunned me back then was the Tigers finished second in 1950 with almost nothing from Virgil Trucks, who missed almost the whole season with a bad arm. And by 1952, they were 50 and 104 and finished last for the first time in their history. And they unloaded everybody when they sent when they sent Art Harriman to the Indians in mid '53. That was the completion of getting rid of. They got rid of everybody.
Yeah. Well, Newhouser also went to the Indians.
Yeah.
And finished was with them in '54, and went to the series with them. But Howdeman and Newhouser were key members of the Indians bullpen, and Howdeman was a pretty good fifth starter.
He won 15 games for them in 1954.
Yeah, he did. He did better. He won more than Feller. And even though people clamored to see Feller in game 4, after the Giants went ahead 3-0, Howdeman deserved to start as much then that year as Feller did. But it would have been good to see Feller, but still.
You mentioned Early Wynn was quoted as a number of times as saying that he didn't know anything about pitching until he fell under the tutelage of Mel Harder. Now, also in that trade, they got Mickey Vernon.
Yeah.
Mickey Vernon was the regular in 1949, and he lost the job to Luke Easter. So they sent Vernon back to Washington for one of the worst pitchers in the history of baseball, Dick White.
Yeah, it was a very.
You remember him?
Horrible. Yeah, oh yeah.
He couldn't throw the ball over the plate to save himself.
No. He made Tommy Byrne look like a control artist.
He made Steve Dalkowski look like a control artist.
Yeah.
But and then they finally unloaded him when they made the trade to get Harriman. They sent Ray Boone, who, as you mentioned a number of times, was booed unmercifully because he succeeded Boudreaux at shortstop and wasn't Boudreaux.
Yeah, and
Tigers put him at third base, and he became an all-star for a few years. And Steve Gromek, who was, from what I've read, was a fairly useful pitcher for when he was with the Indians.
Yeah, well, Gromek won game 4 of the World Series. He put the
that was a famous picture with Larry Doby when he's hugging Larry Doby.
Yeah. Gromek was from Hamtramck, Michigan. And they used to have a day for him. Hamtramck would come down. Sometimes they'd have it at was then Briggs Field. Tiger Stadium was Briggs Field, and they'd have a day for him at Briggs Field when he'd come up there with Cleveland.
Yeah, I saw several games in Tiger Stadium over the years. I liked it.
It was a great park.
Yeah,
a great park. Yeah, I saw the first one and I saw a 49 game there. Ted Williams was playing. It was the Tigers and Red Sox played. Another one of my father's days where he took me Sunday to get another park nearby, and great outing. I remember those games very well.
Yeah, well, basically, my parents took me to a game, Yankee Stadium in 1953, the doubleheader for my birthday in 1954. They took me to a game in the Polo Grounds for my birthday in 1955 because the Yankees were on the road. And by late 1955, a friend of mine we were 12, would take a bus and 2 trains up to Yankee Stadium for day games.
Yeah.
By ourselves.
Yeah.
I told this to somebody today, couldn't believe it.
I know.
Yeah, there's no cell phones and nothing to keep track, and
exactly. Yeah.
You could do it. In those days, you could do that kind of thing.
Yeah. I would go to games with kids in my class and one of the mothers would drop us off outside the stadium. And on Saturday was Kids Day up in Bill Beck in 1948, 49. So kids got in for free. Mothers had to pay Mother's Day fee, and but a mother had to accompany the kids. So when my neighborhood, one mother would take turns, every few weeks, and take 6 or 7 kids with her in the car and drop us off, and we, and then she'd pick us up after the game. She'd shop or do whatever she was doing downtown, and come get us. She'd pay the fee to get in the bleachers, and then walk out and leave us on our own and pick us up after the game. Yeah, you could do stuff like that then. Imagine 12-year-old, 11-year-old. We were 10, 9.
Oh, wow.
Kids walking into a game for, and being allowed to do that today. I mean, imagine, 6 kids being able to afford to get in, period.
This friend, I'll give you this story, and then we're going to have to cut this a little bit, because in 1957, the Yankees were playing a doubleheader with the White Sox on a Sunday. So I had just turned 14. I went up with this friend of mine. We went up there, and we get there. You have $5 on you. It's a lot of money back then. The grandstand, which was 130 at the time, I think, 110, whatever it was, the line was 10 miles, was wrapped around the stadium. So my friend and I made this momentous decision to pay $2.10 for obstructed view seats behind poles. And we got lucky. The row behind us, there were a couple of empty seats. So we went to those empty seats expecting to be kicked out when the people who had those seats came in. They never did.
Yeah.
But to make the momentous decision to spend 80 cents more, but I feel sorry for these kids today. I mean, I have a school across the street from me, and when it lets out, the parents are there with the cars.
Yeah,
it's a wholly terrible different society. Anyway, we got to wrap this up.
But it's been fun once again. Yeah, I really love these talks.
Yeah, I can talk about these like you. I can talk about these teams and that time forever.
Yeah,
I enjoy talking about that much more than talking about the current stuff today.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's
okay.
But all right, it's been great once again, Al.
It's always a pleasure.
I look forward to our next one.
Okay, and say hi to Marilyn.
Will do. Take care.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.